partner of EthAum Venture Partners. EthAum Venture Partners is a deep tech accelerator based in Singapore. We have approximately 56 startups in our portfolio. All of these are AI, ML, blockchain, IoT, robotics, AR, VR kind of startups from different parts of the world, different stages and sectors, including insurtech, right? DigsFact is one of our portfolio startups, and Nishant is the CEO of DigsFact. And we, as accelerator, always try to create value for the startups in terms of connecting them with the potential partners, doing panels like this where we can discuss innovation, trends, and challenges of the industry, and so on and so forth. And this is one of the reasons why we are hosting this panel. Thanks to Alan for putting all the efforts in, bringing panelists, bringing, interesting questions for the panelists and so on and so forth. So now I will pass it on to Nishant so that he can do a quick intro of DigsFact, and then we can jump into the cool questions that Alan has for the panelists. Nishant.
Thank you, Pankaj. Hope everyone can hear me. I'm Nishant Tomar, CEO at DigsFact. Where we're helping insurance company issue same-day checks to policyholders by accelerating the estimation process at FNOL and also reducing the cost by over 90% for the claims estimation. DigsFact, together with EthAum Venture Partners, it's an honor to host this webinar. And our goal is to present the claims trends, challenges, and innovations as experienced by some of the top leaders in the insurance industry who are here with us today. And with that, it's also to facilitate this webinar. I have Alan Walker here, who's also heading up our insurance business unit. So over to Alan. Thank you, Alan.
Great. Thank you, Nishant. Can everybody hear me okay? I see nods. Thank you very much. So hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you are. I'll start, if I may, just by briefly introducing our excellent panel, and I'll go in alphabetical order by first name. So first of all, Dan Moore. Dan, welcome. Dan joined CNA as its Senior Vice President for Worldwide Claims Shared Services just last month. Prior to that appointment, Dan was with QBE North America for 8 years, where he progressed from Senior Vice President for Claims and Transformation through Head of Operations, finishing up as Chief Operating Officer. And if you add in Dan's 9 years of claims experience at Fireman's Fund before joining QBE, he brings huge experience to the panel. So thank you, Dan, for joining us. Next, Garret Gray. So in a change from our originally advertised panelist from CoreLogic, we are delighted to introduce Garret Gray. Garret is the president and CEO of Next Gear Solutions, which you may have heard was acquired just a few weeks ago by CoreLogic. Next Gear is, of course, a market leader in digital workflow platforms and solutions for the property restoration industry. So it's perhaps not surprising that Garret is now also appointed as CoreLogic's lead for all of CoreLogic's claims solutions. So Garret, thank you for joining us. Third, we have Nigel Walsh, Managing Director of Insurance at Google. Nigel's an old friend and colleague and is well known, particularly in the UK insurance industry, for his expertise in digital insurance, a fact that's evidenced by his 25,000 followers on Twitter. Having joined Google 9 months ago, Nigel is now very much focused on the USA, and the US industry will be seeing a great deal more of Nigel in the coming years. And he was just saying at the beginning, he'll be arriving in New York next week, so we'll look forward to seeing Nigel. And last but not least, in alphabetical order, I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Ford from Allstate. Sarah is deeply rooted in claims, having started as a claims adjuster with Allstate just over 10 years ago. Since then, Sarah has progressed through claims leadership roles and claims transformation to her current role as claims innovation manager for Allstate, with a particular responsibility for strategic partnerships. And just a very quick note of congratulations to Sarah for completing her MBA this year. So Dan, Garret, Nigel, and Sarah, welcome. So to the questions, I've got plenty of my own, but we'll also try to use questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, please put it in the chat and we'll attempt to pick it up either during the conversation or towards the end. So with no more ado, I'm going to go for the first question. And to start with, I'd like to go back in time. I would like to go back in time a full 12, 18 months or so and ask, what changes did insurers make to their property claims processes when the COVID-19 pandemic first hit? And I'm going to ask that one first to Sarah from Allstate.
Thanks, Alan. So yeah, and thanks everyone for joining today. Great intros, Alan. Some changes that we made immediately was reevaluating how we inspected. Of course, like with COVID-19, with pandemic concerns, being in customers' homes was a big concern, a big challenge. So just reevaluating the need for physical inspections and shifting more towards a virtual environment for property inspections.
Okay, and I'm sure we'll drill more into what that meant in practice. Let's go to our other insurer here, Dan. What about, well, I guess QBE back then, but you may have a perspective on CNA as well.
Sure. Yes. So probably speaking more at that point from a QBE perspective, but I think Sarah's spot on. Many of us had already started that journey toward virtual adjudication using technologies such as enhanced photos and videos to begin to adjudicate claims without being necessarily on site for certain classes of claims. And the pandemic accelerated, I think, customer adoption of a lot of those technologies, right? I think there was always a promise of that, and we started to see it a little before that. But our adoption rate picked up significantly. Other things that we started to see in terms of changes, also acceleration of digital payment activity, particularly on the personal lines and small business side of the house. For our larger commercial clients, obviously that's a little bit of a different scenario, but certainly for our personal and small business clients, that digital payment activity was critical.
Great. So remote inspections, digital payments. Garret, you and Nigel both have a slightly broader perspective because you see a bunch of different insurers. Garret, what did you see insurers doing at the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, one thing that has been really interesting about the insurance space in the 15 years I've been trying to sell solutions into it is carriers tend to move slow on what they're adopting. They're conservative in their approach to adopting new technology, and so was this trend of going more paperless and virtualizing and digitizing what has traditionally been a pretty manual process. And then COVID happened, and then, oh my gosh, everything moved really fast with most of our top 10 carriers and beyond. And I thought it was really interesting to see the kind of COVID act as kind of jet fuel to a fire that was already starting to kind of burn with some intensity with carriers, because this technology adoption curve is getting easier and easier. Technology is getting better. Our ability to help people across the board implement technologies has gotten better. And COVID just took a train that was already going down a particular path and sped it up. And so everything from what Sarah and Dan mentioned to just complete virtualization of the entire process. Think of every area where there was paper that had to trade hands, or a piece of documentation that required somebody to go out on site. Every piece of that can be automated and virtualized, and that is happening at a really feverish pace right now.
Thank you. And Nigel, what's your perspective from behind your desk in the UK? What did you see?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I'll try not to cover what the folks have covered already. I think there's two things for me. Come back to me later on the words digital indigestion, and I will make people smile about it. But to Garrett's point, I think the digitization of what we've always done has obviously accelerated. We didn't have a choice. I won't talk about the comments made already, The one thing I will say that I've seen and is a passion point of mine is education. Insurance is this industry where we pick up the phone or we go online and we choose to buy or go through a broker and we forget it for a year. And when there's a claim, God forbid there's a claim, we end up calling someone and they come in and fix it. And that couldn't happen anymore. So I think there's a huge uptick in the amount of education about what goes on. No longer can we call the adjuster to come in and just look at stuff and pretend not to know. Now we're the person, you're almost in that movie where someone says the pilot's had an accident, you've got to land this thing. We're that person landing this thing right now. So I think there's been a whole host of education about what happens in the claims process so people don't get lost about what the next steps are, what your role needs to be, because you're now that person with the hands on the flight stick to land that plane and get that claim through the door, because you can't let anyone through the door.
Okay. Thank you. So that's interesting. So most of you have mentioned to some extent it was an acceleration or even a significant acceleration of some things that were happening already. I'd like to press into that a little bit more. So virtualization, remote inspection, digital payments. Dan, which of those were insurers already working on before COVID struck, and which ones were particularly accelerated more than others?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the depending on the insurer. I mean, when we certainly, for example, QBE had been working on virtual adjudication for some time, and had it and was actually quite well prepared for the pandemic due to the work that we had done up to that point in time. Others, in conversation with colleagues and peers, were caught a little maybe more flat-footed, maybe a little more in the exploratory phases. And certainly we're scrambling, I think, to kind of catch up to that. And I think it, some of it comes back to what your original strategy was. Has always been a lot of, for certain carriers, value placed on being that in-person role of the claim professional, being a concierge service, and being in that kind of that high-touch space, right? And just the COVID pandemic required us all to kind of rethink some of those strategic tenets that maybe we'd built on before. But certainly for me, I think the virtual aspect of what we were doing was accelerated. We went from less than really less, like around 30% of our claims being done in a virtual capacity to trying to push that north of 50, and had a good cooperation from our customers. Accelerating the scope and scale of what we could do is the other piece that I saw happen a lot for us in particular. It went from the simpler claims into, all right, how much can we push the envelope on this without losing touch on some of the claims that we were doing. And I see that across the industry, where folks are saying, all right, what's that right boundary? What's the right balance that we need to strike? And that's certainly an area where I've seen the acceleration, the use of those tools, and to make it a little bit easier. It's no longer just taking a picture with your camera and sending it in. Now it's, what's the app to help facilitate that? How do we curate those? How do we even have guided inspections so that instead of me saying, yeah, you took the pictures or took the video, but it wasn't a great shot or a great angle, how do I now guide you live through that process so that you do it one time, quality output, and improve the collaboration process? And I think that was the big piece that we had worked on accelerating, and it continues to accelerate to this day.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, what about Allstate? What's your perspective on what was already being worked on that was then particularly accelerated, as opposed to what was new as a result of COVID that you hadn't really tried before?
Yeah, we were already making like a very strong push towards moving like 50% of our claims to virtual only inspection. When the pandemic hit, though, I quickly reprioritized our guided photo intake process, and was able to kind of leverage some partners to help us understand what's possible there. But we definitely saw a moment of, oh no, we didn't plan for this. This is happening faster than we thought. I think what's kind of interesting is like sitting back and watching how our customers have adopted, or how they're enjoying this collaboration. There's definitely like some photo quality things that have come up where we're like, we can't see everything. We need tools. We need enhanced AI to help us see the customers' homes, but customers have come along to it. So it's just the adoption for us. It's like it met us just face on, just right away. It was a lot.
Cool. Thank you. And Garret, from the perspective of the restoration industry in particular, what changed for you guys? I mean, I'm not even sure how you went and did restoration when people weren't allowed into each other's houses. So talk us through that, if you would.
You know, weirdly enough, like we actually did not see a dip in job starts in the data. So this was really, I think, considered an essential service. And while I think it changed the way the claim was handled, and really forced restoration contractors in particular to up their technology game, which, you know, if we talk about insurers being potentially slower to adopt technology, restoration contractors are also, you know, sometimes struggle as a group to adopt technology because of, you know, the working environments that they're in is really tough. But so things that really changed very quickly is instead of me handing you a piece of paper when I do arrive to your house to sign like a work authorization, now I'm using a digital means of getting your signature where you can sign on your own device and we're not switching, you know, we're not touching things back and forth. So trying to limit the contact when someone has to be in your home, you know, technology was actually a great enabler there. And it really did force even the contracting, restoration contracting world to speed up their adoption as well. But we were tracking, you know, we weren't sure what was going to happen as, you know, as everybody else was in this kind of world where this was unprecedented. But we were watching job starts and people arriving on site. And this was essential enough that there really wasn't a slowdown in terms of actual restoration contractors being able to get into people's homes.
Okay, thank you. And Nigel, what's your perspective on this, but particularly the mix of how much of this was stuff that's already started and is accelerated as opposed to brand new as a result of the pandemic?
I'm going to go with 99% of it was already known and started. I'd argue none of the initiatives that we've got going through the last 18 or 24 months or so are net new initiatives. They are just accelerants. And I say jest, that's probably been a little bit unkind, but they are accelerants to things that we have had in small pockets and a proof of concept and a proof of value in the corner somewhere. And we've just got to scale. You know, I was listening to a podcast a few weeks back that talked about telemedicine and people's reluctance to use telemedicine. Well, in the same instance that you are no longer able to get into a property, now we're all seeing the convenience of being able to get onto our mobile phone at any point in time and do a video call with a physician or clinician at our convenience and reschedule it and do it all digitally. And if we need to go see someone, you can still go and see someone. But that initial triage, we're never going back to the old way ever again. And I think we as insurers need to start to work out, if we're never going back, what does that mean to us now? And when I talked earlier about digital indigestion, I feel we've taken at lots of different parts of the insurance value chain, whether it's claim or ingestion or acquisition, we've taken what we've done in the past and just thrown everything at this new process. And we've worked and we've not dropped a heartbeat. We've done a really, really good job across the industry. But we've just digitized. We've not reimagined what we've done. And if we go back 100 years, 200 years to good old Lloyd's of London here over in the UK and work out, we'd walk a piece of paper in to either our agent, broker, or direct carrier. What's different to what we're doing today? And I think as we emerge from the pandemic now, we've got to consider this digital indigestion. We've just put sticky back plaster or sellotape over things to make them work, and they have done. They've done their job. But if we were to almost reimagine that process, customer in, would we do it this way still? So in answer to your question, I would say the majority of our stuff is as we have it today, just accelerated. But if we had the opportunity to start again, would we do it this way, number one? And would it even exist? Would we just pay out some of these claims in the first place? Would we shift some of them to parametric? Would we not even look at half of these ones? And so much more. And I think it was touched on a minute ago, you know, the photo you sent in, we can't see half the property. So there's loads of new things that are cropping up that we didn't anticipate, whether it's fraud, whether it's old photographs. And we've seen this for anyone that's got 5 minutes on the, you know, spare time while they're grabbing a coffee, jump onto YouTube at some point and look for people jumping in front of cars. And they do it so they can make claims, or they happen to be fraudulent claims. So there's loads of new things that are emerging as a net result of this new economy we've created.
Yeah, and that's great, and we'll definitely come back to some of these, how we push this further, and I'm certainly going to want to explore that a little further in the course of this webinar. But before we go there, Nigel, I'm just thinking about what we've already heard, and all four of you have said what we've been doing is accelerating some things we've already started, and creating entirely new stuff is great, but I'm wondering why we had to accelerate in the first place. I mean, what is it about the insurance industry that we hadn't actually done all this stuff already? And I'll start with you on that one, Nigel. Why was the insurance industry, or the insurance industry's customers, so slow to do everything we just talked about, and had to wait for a pandemic to come along for it to happen?
Oh, that's like the gazillion-dollar question. It's an unfair question. You're asking the person that's on a personal mission to make insurance lovable. It's a difficult question in this group and the folks on the call, because if I turn around to anyone and said, who loves their insurance company, I know, and I can see by people's faces already, everyone would smile and go, of course I love my insurance company. I understand it. I work in the industry. I'm passionate about what I do. You go to a dinner party or a coffee shop and you speak to a friend or colleague and say, hey, I work in insurance, you might get an eye roll and go, oh, okay, and off they go to something different. It's the same when we try and acquire talent and so much more. It's currently an industry, in my mind, that I talked about it a minute ago, we fire and forget. We buy it once, we hope never have to use you. But as the business model of insurance changes, that's all changing at the same time. So it's progressed at the pace it needed to. And I think the investment of $50 billion over the last couple of years on insurtechs and emerging new organizations that are leveraging technology that we've had in our everyday lives, whether it's a shopping experience, a utility experience, or anything else, is now coming to other things that we just use on a less frequent basis. So it's always been there. Alan, I think you and I have talked about this, I'm going to say for 15 years. And I go back to the days, we could go back 15 years and say, these are the things that you and I dreamt up all those years ago, and they're now just going into production. So either you and I did a really bad job 15 years ago, or we just didn't need it back then, or we were brilliant futurists. I'm not sure which combination of those it is.
That's great. So Sarah, you're one of these wonderful insurers. Why didn't Allstate do all this stuff, all this wonderful stuff you've told us about, sooner and faster?
Yeah, I agree with Nigel. It's like the need arrived and we shifted priorities very quickly. It was sitting in a dusty, dark corner. And, for us, it was like hail that we were focused on before COVID. And then it quickly became virtual inspections and, having more tools to understand damage and severity so that we could segment faster. So we just sped it all up, and unfortunately a little reactive. But I think we're learning and kind of like now going back with a fine tooth to say, like, how can we reimagine what it really looks like, the process, and not just, this image capture, not just this damage identification, and kind of like moving the whole thing together forward towards like our digital transformation. So I think COVID just had to happen as it did.
The burning platform. So Dan, you said that a lot of stuff you were already doing, and from chats with others in the industry, you were already further ahead in some areas. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, I think there were always, for lack of a better term, bigger priorities that tended to be in the way for people, and some of that, when and just pick up on Sarah's point, hail was a huge issue for the industry, so everybody's kind of focusing on things like that. You combine that with, I think, Nigel's comment around the telemedicine. The reality is I think for almost all of our industries, whether it's insurance or medicine or others, we had a false notion of what needed to be done physically versus not, right? And I don't think as a group we had fully pressure tested that. Even in the work that we were doing early on, I think we, in part, many times because folks had grown up in that doing it one way, thinking about doing it another way was challenging. It wasn't really in our genesis in the beginning of moving more to a more digital process was really more of a customer service play. We started thinking, well, who wants to have phone calls repetitively? It wasn't even about not having someone in the house. It was thinking about the scheduling process and the return phone calls. And I call you while you're in the middle of a work meeting to schedule a time to come to the house. And you call me back while I'm on a call with another customer. And 2 weeks later, we're trying to set up an appointment, right? That kind of process is just a backwards process. And to be able to say, via text, hey, here's, select a time that works for you, and we're going to do a guided tour, and literally from F&O. I mean, you could do that even sometimes at F&OL, and rethinking that, it just changed the dynamic. And you pick up on, the comments around that were made around, the mitigation not falling off. There are certain things that absolutely has to be done in person. I mean, as much as I think we would all love to be able to mitigate a loss digitally, you can't have digital dryers pulling out moisture. That just doesn't work, right? So there are certain things that have to be done in person, but I think the pandemic forced us to look at more angles around what actually had to be physical than not, right? And so, for example, and what needed to be done with people present versus not present. How could you think about minimizing that? And so we went from a customer service angle when we first started to also then thinking, man, we haven't pushed that boundary far enough in terms of the digital. And that's what I would say has probably caused all of us to be a little behind. And I can empathize with Nigel and yourself. Literally, I hate to even say this now, but like almost 20 some odd years ago, I had a proposal out for a large vehicle manufacturer for a telematic F&OL solution. I think they're just now getting around to finally doing something like that. So I think I put myself in your guys' category. We haven't done a good enough job pushing that needle forward.
That's funny. Thank you. Garret, anything to add on this particular point?
Yeah, I think, from a property perspective, this is really complex. If you look at auto and where you've had kind of a very different industry dynamic in the technology space, you had three major players that were, three major estimating players really competing and driving innovation throughout the entire space. And they still haven't solved this completely. And with auto, you've got a VIN number. You know exactly how that car was spec'd. You can bring that car to a body shop and have it worked on. You don't have to send anyone out. So, and that's still difficult to solve. And now we're talking about people's homes where you have to get into their living space. Every home is different. Every home, there is no real manufacturer VIN number for a home, although CoreLogic is working on CLIP to kind of help solve that. But it really is complex. And I think, carriers have the difficult task of segmenting which claims can be handled in different ways. There is no silver bullet for everything. And so I think that naturally slows this down, and it really forces everyone to solve particular scenarios because there will be no one size fits all. Not maybe 15 years from now as AI gets better, but I think right now to practically solve these claims, you kind of have to take them in a segmented approach, figure out what technologies work well enough to put them into production, and that's a complex task.
And so while we've got this group together, I do like the idea of figuring out how to push the boundaries further and where to go next. And also, because I know all of the panelists, I know you would start by saying, what actually are the customer needs and what do we need to do around the customer? So I wish I had a virtual whiteboard here within Zoom, which I could do, but I don't think we'll fire this up. I'd like to ask each of you in turn, what do you see the main pain points now for policyholders, end customers of insurers, the main pain points now in the typical property claims process? And we'll start with I don't know. Let's start with Dan.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's always pain points, and I think a big part of that is just the amount of the amount of data that is oftentimes required in order to help adjudicate a claim. And a lot of times that falls on customers to help produce, whether that's providing access to the building, whether that's providing details on how the loss happened. So I think a lot about, the future for us is how do we think about leveraging information that already exists, or being able to find ways to create data that can be used in that loss. So whether that's, we think about things like Internet of Things, being able to capture data that historically highly protected risks. They had sprinkle systems, burglar alarms, things like that, but they weren't necessarily collecting the same amount of information about the ambient environment. Machinery, equipment, things like that weren't necessarily capturing what was happening with the spec. And what was it? Was it one of the dryers that caught on fire that then spread to another part of the facility? How do we think about those things? Being able to leverage that so that that we were able to reduce the burden on the client of a deep prolonged investigation, because we have access to data. We're able to create that information becomes really important. I think similarly around how do we use information? There's a lot of information available about property. CoreLogic obviously produces a lot of information around that. There's a lot of aerial imagery and things like that that allow us to use that to reduce the burden on the customer of us being intrusive. There's been a lot of work done to move to the vertical sides of buildings, and a lot of advancement there that's allowed us to advance that. I think the next phase is us being able to more effectively move into the building with that kind of technology, so that we're able to further advance that. And all of that really goes, in my mind, to helping make the process smoother and less intrusive on the policyholder, whether that's a personal lines policyholder or a commercial policyholder. Using data and creating data, using data that already exists and creating a broader set of data to assist in the facilitation of the process.
Okay, so I heard the amount of data required from the customer is a pain point. Physical access to the building, requiring the customer to tell the story of the claim, and the overall smoothness, or I guess lack of smoothness of the process as a whole. So that's great. Sarah, would you endorse those? Add any more?
Yeah, we saw during the pandemic, post-pandemic, about a third of our customers, they're not receiving the final settlement like the one time. So we have like supplements, high supplement activity we have in claims that are virtually inspected. So kind of to Dan's point too, it's like all of these things, we increase our loss costs, we increase the cycle time and the customers calling in. So having images, high quality images at the first notice of loss, that just allows us to be able to reduce those supplements, the additional times the customer, we're going back and forth with a customer. I think that's a pain point. We'd like to be in a straight through processing environment for claims that are under $10,000. So that's kind of like one of our goals. But I think, yeah, the number of times the customer's calling in for any particular reason is a huge pain point for us.
The number of calls. Okay, so that's I guess, as you've just said, that's a pain point that goes both ways. It's a pain for the customer, but it's also a pain for you yourselves. Okay, great. Nigel, comments that you've seen talking to a bunch of different insurers. What are the customer pain points?
I think Dan highlighted it quite nicely and Sarah summed it up, but Dan highlighted about 100 different things that had to go on. So I go back to my first point about education. If we don't know what the process is because we've never been through it, we have absolutely no clue what to give or what to expect at any one point in time. So as a net result, if you listen into any of the claims calls, some of them are very direct, very clear, very precise and prescriptive, and others are all over the place as we try and work through the bits that we need and the bits that we don't need. Imagine doing a telemedicine type interview or discussion with a physician online and trying to explain that I've got a sore throat or I've got dry eyes, whatever it might be. It's really hard to work out if you don't know what that process is. So I go back to education. Hey, if we have a claim, these are the things that we do. We spend an awful lot of money as insurers acquiring and getting you to become a customer, but we do very little then to tell you what happens if you need us. We might say, here's something you stick in your car, or here's your policy documentation that you'll file away, and they'll be in the, one of the paper files behind me somewhere to go, well, this is your claim, your policy number, and if you ever need to call us, this is what you need to do. Ask me to find it, and I will spend an hour trying to find it in this stuff behind me. So for me, it's about being very clear and reminding people in a easy, simple way what they have to do in the event of. So getting back to education for me is absolutely critical, number one. And then to Sarah's point, we've got to stop being reactive. Imagine getting an update on a daily basis that said, Sarah, there's nothing for you to do today. We've got it under control. This is where you are. Imagine getting the call the next day to say, Sarah, Bob is coming to your house today. This is what his ID will look like. This is what you need to do. You can verify it here. He should be here between X and Y time. I think to one of the points made earlier, I think it was Dan, the EthAum process, where we spend 2 weeks trying to get a date in the diary to have someone come round. The thing that's changed, of course, is we're now all at home. So we're all used to the doorbell ringing and running out and getting a DHL or UPS or whoever package turning up. In my case, it feels like 30 times a day, but we're at home. So it's always here. We've never had to run to the post office or the collection depot to go and get a parcel because we've always been at home. So we have to work out, as we return to the office and no longer are at home 24/7, how does that impact our new value chain for ethanol and everything else going forward?
Okay, thank you. So understanding the process, greater proactivity in the process, dealing with this issue going forward of people being back in the office. Nigel's obviously an optimist on that front, that there will still be people going into the offices. Garret, anything to add from your perspective? I mean, I guess in some ways you have more direct contact with customers than some of the insurers on the call do even.
Yeah, look, I think there are, if you think about it, when a claim happens, there's kind of 2 or 3 primary things that are important. One, you don't want to, if you go back 15 plus years, it was so difficult to switch your insurance carrier. That pain of switching an insurance carrier was enough to, make even a bad claim experience not necessarily cause you to flip who your providers are. Now it's completely different. And, with the age of, billions of dollars of advertising, at least in the American space, where you can switch your insurance carrier online in 15 minutes or whatnot. It really ups the game for carriers to really facilitate a smooth process when there is a claim where everyone feels like they were treated fairly and they were serviced quickly. At the same time, carriers have to watch severity and they have to have their guidelines implemented and they have to make sure that their claims handling expenses don't skyrocket as well. And so these are the 2 things that they're trying to balance. And so I think technology plays a great role there, but it's a difficult thing because it's like squeezing a water balloon. You can, speed up the process and really make it smooth for the insured. And as Sarah pointed out, then you have supplements come in later because it wasn't fully inspected properly, or there was, hidden damage that because we couldn't see it, in the image, and we tried to move too fast. And that can, create secondary damage, which is expensive either for the carrier or for the homeowner. And so, there's like I said earlier, there's a lot of complexity here, which is why it's not easy to solve, but it's why it's worth trying to solve.
If I can jump in really quickly on that last point, I feel we've been having this debate for probably 2 decades, if not longer, on the comparison sites and switching. And it's been a long-standing thing here in Europe, to the extent that the regulator has now stepped in to stop people switching as fast as it has. I suspect in Asia and the US it's going to probably go through the same sort of cycle. But we switch insurer because it's got expensive and our quote we got back is higher than we wanted. We couldn't negotiate it down, therefore we switch. We don't yet switch based on claim experience. Specifically, if we've had no claim experience, and we get a renewal quote from any of the aggregators that are now live in the USA, we will switch at a point that says it's X $100 cheaper for me to move, even if we've had no claim, because we can save money for that reason. And we've got to try and work out, in the same way you probably wouldn't book a holiday in the good old days to come back post-COVID, you wouldn't book a holiday without checking on TripAdvisor to go, is the hotel the right sort of place? Did it get good reviews? Was it clean? Was it family friendly? Whatever else. What's the equivalent of that for our insurance providers to go, the claims experience was amazing, the adjusters were helpful, we could do it all remotely, we got paid first time, to Sarah's point, and so much more. Today, we still focus on the one thing that matters because we don't often use it or don't want to use it, and that's the dollar amount up front.
Yeah. And while you're just talking there, Nigel, Laurie Pon, who's on the webinar, was just commenting on the chat and what you were saying previously about proactively making and keeping appointments. And she's saying, for goodness sake, there are contractors out there who've got this sussed and know how to do it. It's amazing that insurers haven't yet figured it out, and we really need to do that.
Yeah,
so,
I couldn't agree more. From someone who has lived through an escape of water claim, I hear all the insurers shudder when I say that. That moved this small young family out for 6 months, and had, I won't even go into the detail because it's a cautious.
That would take the full hour. Yeah,
it really would. But it was a complicated procedure that had probably 30 to 40 different contractors and entities orchestrated poorly, that laid a very negative perspective for someone that loves insurance. That should have been simple because we've been doing this for hundreds of years.
So let's grasp this particular nettle. Then we've got 4 large brains on this call. Let's get some views on what the property claim of the future looks like, and I want to go far enough out, maybe say 5 years, that you're not too focused on what you can do today and what you can do tomorrow. And I'm going to start with you, Dan. As you envisage the perfect property claims process of the future, what does that look like, Dan?
Well, I think it's also probably important to distinguish between personal and commercial lines, right? I think a lot of our commentary today has been centered on a fair amount to personal to small commercial, and so obviously that looks very different. If I think, certainly as I think about CNA and its commercial specialty book, obviously for me, I pick up on something that Nigel said early on, which is around greater use of parametric and other capabilities. There's particularly with more sophisticated and larger clients who have risk management partners and maintenance departments and things like that, the ability to have a more streamlined parametric oriented type approach to claims is really, in my mind, a big part of the future. Obviously, it's not the full thing, and it only works in certain scenarios. But I think, again, as we talked about pushing the boundaries on physicality and what has to be physical, I think there's also a conversation that says, how do we partner with clients to be true risk-bearing partners and helping them understand how to potentially use tools like that in the future, which really do eliminate a large portion of the adjustment loss costs and really do focus on a true cost of loss at some point, right? Some contracted loss. I think that's going to be important. And I'll leave to Sarah and some of the others, the personal line side of the house, but I see that being a big play. Maybe the only other piece I would add is I think, and it's a bit of a claims piece, but I think it's a bit of a broader piece, and it goes to your comment on Nigel's optimism that we return to work. Commercial property, the nature of commercial property is changing dramatically. It has been for some time, and the pandemic, with most things, accelerated that. Offices obviously aren't going to be closed, aren't going to be utilized in the same way. Commercial property vacancy is at a different rate. How does that impact what we do and how we think about it, both from an underwriting standpoint and a claim handling standpoint? Is going to be critical over the next 5 years.
Thank you. Sarah, what do you reckon the future of the property claims process? Sarah, you might be on mute.
She's
There we
asking
go. Yeah. So Allstate, and from the personal lines perspective, it's like there's about 3 or 4 things that seem ideal to us. And first, it's digital claim reporting. Number one, it's all claims reported digitally. Second, more of an augmented decision making for the adjusters. So this means from Allstate investing in framework technology and tools that are gonna just really drive that decision making forward. We are hiring just an army of new property adjusters that don't have property restoration experience. So having tools that aid this new generation of adjusters is important to us. And then with that, it's like minimized effort for the adjuster. So the role begins to look different. So now instead of like them driving claims and being these claims adjusters, it's really like, how can they navigate with tools and provide the best experience? And then just more intentional customer interactions. And so just right now, you know, customer or adjusters are reactive, and sort of just our customers are as well, and calling in. So really having staged, sort of intentional, more mindful parts of the claim where the adjusters and customers know they can connect with each other. We think all these things can kind of play a direct role in facilitating our like digital transformation. And we know that tools is just a huge part of it. So.
Thank you. Garret.
Yeah, like I think the hard part to answer this question is I think it's probably going to be a lot more incremental than we really think, even on this call. Just if you go back 15 years ago, I would have, and you asked me the same question, I would have given you a completely different answer from where we're at. And I think the real answer is things move slower than we all want. I think COVID did, change that, and I think that has put us on this path. And I think technology is getting to a place where we probably will make a lot more progress in the next 5 years than we did in the previous 5 years. But I do think really the end game, at least in my view, is where technology enables people to focus on people. And so the job of the adjuster in 5 years is hopefully radically different than what it is today, where the adjuster is actually there to make that policy holder feel comforted, understand how the process is going to work, and have really great bedside manner, because all of the things that normally take up the adjuster's time has been automated, and the quality has increased through the what computers can do and technology can do to streamline and scrub the process. And so I just look at adjusters, and different carriers will take different approaches to this. Some carriers will use this to thin out the workforce, or at least not have to worry about hiring new adjusters when there's a lot of retiring adjusters today. And a lot, as Sarah said, it's a struggle to find adjusters that have actual experience, and there's just a workforce shortage. But I think that others will take the opportunity to increase customer service and really change the role of the adjuster so they can focus on their policyholders in a more meaningful way.
Okay, thank you. Nigel, insurance process, property claims process of the future.
I think it's been mentioned already. I think your 5 years comment's probably too soon. In 5 years' time, we'll still be talking about the same thing and Internet of Things and dealing with the indigestion that we've had for the last 2 years. And we'll just get more efficient and taking out some of the bits of fat and extra stuff that we didn't need. So we'll be tinkering at 1% and 2% improvement and being happy with it. Fast forward 10 years, and we might be in the elimination period. How do we get to a point? If I stick to Dan's point on the commercial rather than personal, regardless, you just have to drive around and you see new properties being built, whether they're homes or commercial warehouses. In fact, anything we do in life, nothing's been built today with less technology than we had previously. So we're just getting smarter and more aware. How do we use that awareness and smarts to be more proactive in what we do? And people like Hartford Steam Boiler, for example, have been doing this for years with preventative maintenance and insights and all that sort of good stuff. But what that's driven for me is a change in business model. If we continue to operate on the same business model, then I think we're constrained in the level of innovation that we can actually have going forward. But if we're open to changing the business model that we have today, whether it's 5 years out or 10 years out, then we've got a good chance of changing the claims experience at the same time too. I've got a good friends of mine that run a cycle insurance business in Europe. And again, they've changed the model. And they've changed the model so that if no one claims, you all pay less. Now, it sounds relatively simple, but equally, they've got a stop loss in place with a capacity provider that says you'll never pay above market rate. And they're prepared to go and challenge the market in that way. I just think it needs more of that at scale to start changing some of these things. So to summarize, not much in the next 5 years, we'll just get more efficient. As we shoot into the 10-year horizon 2 space, we'll get towards elimination, but it's got to be on the back of a business model change, not just technology.
So Nigel, I'm disappointed by this because I'm not sure I've got another 10 years left in this industry. I may be a bit old for that. I'd like to see a little bit more change. And I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat. Rob Tyree is on the call, who some of you might remember. He was head of insurance for Salesforce a few years ago, and he's saying, well, he's talking about how we'll need to respond to broader changes within the industry, but he's also saying, but what about the AI impact on claims adjustment in the next 5 years, and why can't we do that? And Nigel, those of you who've read Nigel often talks about the fact that insurance customers don't want ingredients, they want cake. And Nigel, if I look at the ingredients that are already here now today, not 5 years' time or 10 years' time, I've got a home full of Nest cameras and sensors. Nest is owned by Google. We've talked about AI, computer vision, machine learning, etc. So for me, cake would be me receiving a text or an email saying, hey, Alan, sorry to see from your cameras that you've got flood damage. You can either click here for an instant payment of $3,000 or here for next gear to come and fix the damage. And we've got all the ingredients to make that happen now. So why not? And why is it going to take 10 years? When's Google going to do it, Nigel?
Maybe the question, or maybe the answer actually, Alan, is your physician's going to tell you in advance if you're eating the cake to say, don't eat that, Alan, it's bad for your diet. So knowing what's going to go through you in the first place. In answer to your why not now, that's what we started out with, right? We said we've all agreed previously that it's always been there, it's just accelerated. And I think my observation of the industry over the last 12 or 18 months has been we accelerated. We didn't use it as an opportunity to jump so far ahead that we didn't need to look back. So now we're still playing catch up all the time. We're not, to your point, we have so much stuff. I mean, Dan mentioned as well earlier, we have all these great things that are going on around us from commercial property and insights, whether it's aircon, water, fire, carbon monoxide, you name it, we know what's going on. What we don't have is the insights from all that data just yet. So there's plenty of stuff out there. We're just failing to think big enough, in my mind, to go after it in a way that allows us to go change the industry. We're doing incremental change rather than exponential change.
Yeah. And let's go back to customers. And I'm going to ask Sarah and Dan, for your insurers, both for your insureds, both personal lines and commercial lines, do you think your customers would have an appetite for this sort of highly proactive, we see there's a problem, we're going to fix it or send you a check? Do you think your customers would have an appetite for that in a shorter time horizon than 5 to 10 years, Sarah?
Definitely, yeah. We have goals of processing some of our most simplest claims within 7 days, and we don't always make those goals, and it seems like, why can't we just do that? So we know our customers, they want more. They also want to have a wraparound experience. So being close to them even when there is not a claim, and them understanding that there are repair options, there are things available, just call us. So a lot of I love what Nigel said, but a lot of the innovation that we're doing is also just from a seamless, we're focusing on a seamless and elegant ecosystem where, you have like Allstate as protection, and not just in the event of a claim, there's other things. And of course that allows us to bring on partners that have names that customers recognize, that also make them feel safe. So I think that there's definitely an appetite for it, and we continue to look for the best partners, right? So to help us drive like the mission forward. So.
Okay, and I'm going to ask the same question to Dan, but just a quick reminder. So we've just got a few minutes left. A couple of points came in the chat, which I picked up. But if any of you on the call want to ask specific questions of the panelists, now's the time to put them in the chat, and then I'll come back to those after getting Dan's perspective on what customers want, demand, or indeed will accept in a shorter time scale than 10 years.
Yeah, so I might take a slightly contrarian view to the idea that customers are actively bringing that into their house and would do so for insurance purposes. I think they're interested in, preventing porch pirates. I think they're interested in having their, their temperature on their phone and things like that. I think there's a lot of interest in some of those things. I'll go back, back to my Fireman's Fund days. We had a $5,000 water shutoff valve that I couldn't get high net worth clients to install on their own. I had to pay for it as part of a water loss, right? So if you can't get a high net worth client to put $5,000 to prevent their loss, and we see that challenge even as I went through the QB personal lines bit. There's a challenge in getting clients through that. Similar challenge exists in the commercial space. You're starting to see adoption, but what I see happening is it more being a slow evolution. On the commercial side, it's more about as we replace our highly protected capabilities with some of these new Internet of Things, that's where that comes into play. And it tends to become like this. Well, which comes first, chicken or egg? Are you going to pay me to or induce me to install these either on the personal lines or the commercial lines, or am I going to do that and you take advantage of it? I think the other challenge a little bit is interoperability, right? I mean, there's a lot of brands, they don't all talk together. So yes, if you're going to go all in on Ring or Nest or in this case, in support of Nigel and team, the Google stack, then that's one thing. But if you're going to do multiple solutions, the interoperability becomes a challenge. And how do we think about that? Providing information back to the insurer. So I think there's an appetite for more technology as we build out property and homes, et cetera. But I think in context of it being a major driver, I think insurers are still going to have to put a lot of skin in the game to get clients, both personal and commercial, to adopt some of these technologies for insurance purposes.
So the insurer investing in addition to or instead of the customer. Interesting. Yeah. Garret, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Dan. The idea of having Google or anybody watching my cameras and telling me I've got a loss is probably a little beyond the pale for me. However, I do think that, like Dan said, I think this will be incrementally at least shrinking the severity of claims with technology that's out there, and maybe getting to quicker notification of claims. I think all that's really going to be important, but I do think it is, a far ways out where people will actually install these sensors. I think we struggle, or insurers struggle, to get this put into people's cars. I think it's going to be a struggle to get it into their homes.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so there's nothing else in the chat, so I'm going to ask the last question. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds each, and the question is, okay, so Alan's nirvana is not going to happen for at least 5 or 10 years. What realistically are we able to do and should we do in the next 1 to 2 years? And let's start with Sarah. On mute. Sarah, you're on mute.
I think she's asking for 1 minute. So if you want, I can hop in.
Okay, sorry, 1 minute. Got it. Okay, well, how about Dan? Dan,
yeah, sure. Sure. So I think, look, to me, I think it'll probably be a lot about what Nigel talks about, the digital indigestion. It's going to be cleanup and consolidation, all the stuff that got kind of slammed in and accelerated. How do you make that a little more cohesive? How do you make that a little smoother? How do you edge out some of the fact that got built into it? It'll start to be, taking some lessons learned from that to think about what the next 5 to 10 years looks like. But I think it's mostly kind of smoothing some of the rough edges of the last 2 years.
All right. Thank you very much.
I couldn't find my mute button. From the personal lines, Allstate's perspective, it's like at least measurements. If we could get automated measurements, that's like, there's damage identification materials. We want all those things. But if we could have an automated way to understand measurements in every home, that would just be basic, and we should be doing that soon. So.
You may want to talk to Nishant after the call about that one. So Garret, what about you? Garret, you're on mute. Hey.
Yeah. Sorry. It's not easy to find the mute button sometimes. I sympathize with Sarah. Look, I think what we're focused on in a weird way is some of the basics that still are, problems for carriers today. So for example, how do you better match need and resource, and geographically aware resources with an understanding of their past performance and what we think they're going to be able to do on this particular loss. How do you do that on a national scale with multiple vendors that carriers want to be able to choose from in a way that is fast and efficient so that we can get out to the loss and mitigate and take care of the loss as fast as possible? And when we have to get somebody out there, whether it's an adjuster and or a service provider, like Nigel said earlier, a lot of times there's multiple service providers that have to get out. You might need an IA, a content specialist, and a restorer. How do you coordinate those efforts and make sure the homeowner or policyholder knows who's coming, sees their face ahead of time so they feel safe to let them in their home, has real-time updates of who's coming and when, and then it cascades from there all the way through getting to a faster, fair settlement that is allows for the carrier's guidelines to be automatically applied. And so, as much as I would love to be all the way to the virtual, full end-to-end process. I think we're still working on the basics because there's a real need there, and I don't think that within the next 5 years that will be eliminated.
Okay, that's great. Nigel, final thoughts.
Controversial, I guess. Garret, to your point, we could spend the next couple of years doing the incremental changes, or we could just go all after it, right? So if we imagine that we're going to incrementally improve by 3 to 5% for the next 2 years, that would be a job well done, and we would have got incrementally better. But what if we went after the 30%? What if we went after the 50%? What if we went after how do we 10x this idea? And what if we only got halfway there? We'd still be at 50%. So I think coming out of COVID, we have an amazing opportunity to almost reimagine what we've done and say, are we thinking big enough? If we had the opportunity to sweep all this aside, what would we do differently? Because we wouldn't build incrementally. Now, I get we've got a legacy. I get that we've got a structure, an organization, people, technology. We can find 1,000 reasons to say not do this. But equally, I think if we look to the future, and I always use this example with my kids, I've got a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. I can't get hold of my 12-year-old on phone, on email, on WhatsApp. If I want to speak to him, I've got to send him a Discord. So I've got to learn to adapt. Exactly, Alan, right? So I've got to learn to adapt how the kids engage and what they're talking on. And unless we at a pace, I feel we're always going to be on the back foot. So I think it's our opportunity to go, we want to take this. What should we do differently? There's nothing wrong with incremental. We will have to do that as well. But we're working bottom up rather than top down. And I would go for what would it look like top down?
I'm delighted Nigel's got a bit more bullish at the end of the call. Look, we've overstayed our welcome. So Dan, Garret, Nigel, and Sarah, thank you very much for your contributions. Extremely thoughtful. Thank you to EthAum and to Nishant at DigsFact for sponsoring this webinar. Thanks very much to the participants. I hope those of you who are watching this on video get something out of it as well. And just wish to tie up there with thanks to everybody. See you again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.